One morning in late September 2009, I woke up in what appeared to be a hospital room with my mother's face a few feet away, looking at me. And I'm wondering, what happened? Where am I? Memories came flooding back. I'd been a platoon commander at a West Coast-based SEAL team. We were selected to deploy to Afghanistan. As a key leader in the platoon, it was important that I go to Afghanistan in advance of the rest of my teammates so that I could get on the ground early and meet up with the unit that we would be replacing to see how they were planning and conducting operations. I deployed in early September 2009, got on the ground in Afghanistan, met up with that unit. A couple nights later, they would be going out on an assault operation that I would be a part of. Now, earlier that day, we went into a mission briefing room to go over the plan. The plan was to conduct a 40-person helicopter insertion and then foot patrol several kilometers under cover of quiet and darkness in order to conduct this assault against a Taliban compound. I'd be part of a 10-person element that was assigned to detach from the main assault force prior to the assault commencing, proceed to the top of a large hill. We knew from satellite imagery studies that there was a Russian fort at the top of the hill. We wanted to own the high ground. That meant clearing and holding the fort, owning that hilltop. We'd then radio down to the main assault force, which would then proceed with the target assault prior to first light. That's the plan. We go to the flight line. We load the helicopters. They take off. 45-minute flight northwest out of the airfield. They touch down. We get off the back and start moving out with a sense of purpose. Everyone's looking through night vision goggles. It's green and black, grainy. When we got to the designated point, the 10-person element that I'm a part of detaches from the main assault force as per the plan and proceeds to that large hill. I estimated it would be about a 15 to 20-minute hike to get to the top. Working our way up, single file, the 10 of us, as we neared the top of the hill, we spread out, very much at the ready, not knowing if there was anybody up there taking cover behind the crumbled structure of the old fort. As I'm moving forward, looking through the night vision goggles, I take a step, I take another step. All of a sudden, a flash of light under the night vision goggles, and I'm on the ground. I didn't know what had happened. I didn't hear anything. I'm coming to, disoriented, and then it occurred to me that I must have stepped on a pressure plate. Pressure plates are typically buried underground. The weight of a human or object up above presses down on the earth. The two plates make a connection, and the bomb goes off. In this case, the bomb was actually two 105-millimeter artillery shells wired together, intended to go off. This can destroy an armored vehicle, but the second shell didn't explode, and the first one went off low order. Not all of the explosive powder detonated. Nevertheless, it was a massive explosion. I'm laying there in the dirt, wondering if my teammates are alive. My helmet had been blasted off, the night vision goggles with it. I couldn't see anything. I couldn't move, only my arms seemed to work, and for a second, laying there in the dirt, I felt completely helpless. I couldn't do anything. But the next thing I know, my teammates are upon me. None of them had been injured in the blast. They're assessing the situation. The situation was this. I now have a double femoral artery bleed. I'm not going to make it beyond 2 minutes unless immediate action is taken. We are on an exposed hilltop in vicinity of a Taliban stronghold. There are likely additional buried improvised explosives in vicinity of this hilltop, and indeed there were. My teammates took action. The medic started applying a tourniquet to one of my lower limbs, cranking it down as hard as he possibly could to try to staunch the blood flow. This was the first register of pain. The blast itself had left me in shock. But with the application of that tourniquet, I'm really starting to feel the pain, but he had to apply 6 total tourniquets, 3 on each limb. This was very painful, but I had no idea about the world of pain I was going to enter in just a couple minutes. Meanwhile, there's a scramble going on to get the helicopters, which had initially dropped us off and gone back to the airfield, back in time to extricate me. My teammates up above on the hilltop were ordered to get me down off that hill ASAP. So they started dragging me by the shoulder straps of my kit down this steep, dark, rocky descent. This was more pain than I've ever been in my life. Every craggy rock cutting into my body like a sharp knife. My world was inundated and consumed by the pain of this moment, trying to focus on the exhortations of the medic to stay awake, stay awake. Eventually, my teammates got me down off that hill over to the helicopter landing zone. The helicopter overhead was precariously low on fuel. It came down to land. They dragged me onto the back. Within 1 minute, I'm told, of the helicopter reaching the bingo fuel mark, where it would have had to leave the scene without me. They got me on board. I shook my friend's hand. He got off the back. The tail ramp went up. There was a light in my face, and then lights out for me. The next thing I know, I'm coming to in this hospital room with my mother's face a few feet away, and I'm wondering, what happened? How did I get here? Some of the first words out of my mouth commented upon the exceedingly strong coffee breath coming out of my mother's mouth, hitting me full force in this sterile ICU room. But I remember early on asking a medical professional to the right of my bed whether my legs are gone. You see, my mind was clouded by opiates, my lower body covered in blankets. I wasn't looking down that way, and no one was telling me anything specific. I remember that person pausing and then saying yes. Let me tell you, that's a tough thing to hear. It's a really tough thing to try to process. In addition to finding out that both of my legs are now amputated above the knees, I found out that I have a shattered pelvis being held in place by an external fixator, remaining in place for who knows how long. I have a colostomy bag, a bladder bag. I'm going through surgery Monday, Wednesday, Friday, week after week. These are long, complicated surgeries. All of this time in the operating room meant that I had a lot of anesthesia coursing through my system, and it slowed things down. So I woke up from this approximately 10-day medically induced coma with an NG tube inserted up my nose, down my throat, into my stomach. This NG tube meant that I couldn't eat or drink anything, not even take a single sip of water. So I was fed by IV, hydrated by IV. I had a burning fever that continued unabated, and this fever combined with an adverse mental reaction that I was having to the painkillers, and it manifested in horrific nightmares centered on my last waking experiences in Afghanistan. And then I started thinking long-term thoughts. Why did this happen? This was my first combat deployment, the first operation within the deployment. My teammates weren't even on the ground in Afghanistan yet. I'll never have the chance to put my leadership and training, everything I've worked for years, to this ultimate test, because the legs to be an operational Navy SEAL are gone, and they aren't coming back. So much of my personal identity was wrapped up in this job. I started thinking, what is the rest of my life going to look like? Am I ever going to get out of surgery? Am I going to make it out of this hospital? Will I get to walk again? Will I be in a wheelchair? I don't know. I started thinking about broader implications. How am I going to find meaning, fulfillment, now that I can no longer do this job, but most importantly, no longer be a part of this team, exactly the way in which I've been a part of it? Where do I go from here? This was my ground zero. My life was devoid of momentum, and yet I knew I needed it. I knew that if I'm ever going to climb out of this hole, I'm going to need some energy, some positivity, some momentum. I think we've all experienced momentum in life. We even have an expression for it. I'm on a roll, and this is a good thing, because momentum, when it exists, is a driving force. It can propel you above and beyond challenges and obstacles in your life. But how do you create momentum when you're completely at a standstill, facing some of life's most difficult ordeals? We know from physics that the formula for momentum is mass times velocity. Well, my body mass is down a little bit because I'm missing some parts I once had, but I'm now stable. My velocity, however, is zero. How do you create velocity or forward progress when you're stuck in an ICU bed, when you don't even have the legs to take the first step out of that bed? Well, I've come to find that there are two critical factors involved in creating or generating momentum, the kind of momentum that can then sustain you through hard times. First, there's perspective. I had to look at the totality of the situation. I could see my mother and sister in the ICU room. I could talk to them. I could hear them. I could comprehend them. These interactive capabilities were crucial given the concussive effects of the blast. My arms will fully heal and be good to go. My residual limbs, although amputated above the knees, and don't get me wrong, that's tough, but they are long enough to be fitted for prosthetic legs. And, well, I'm hearing good things about prosthetic technology, and with some hard work, I should be able to walk again and maybe even get to run again. And when I do get these prosthetic legs, it occurred to me that now, as a double amputee, I have the opportunity for the first time in my life to stand over 6 feet tall if I want to, right? But on this theme of perspective, when I got to the point in my recovery where I was learning how to walk on prosthetic legs at Walter Reed Military Medical Center, I was surrounded by dozens of injured service members. And some of these people were missing 3 limbs, in some cases 4 limbs. Not to mention those who had been blinded or severely burnt by improvised explosive devices overseas. Their situation seems so much more difficult and painful than mine. And of course, those who are no longer with us today, I knew back then, and I still know, that their families would give anything for their loved one to be in this situation. If something had to have happened to them on a deployment overseas, to just be missing 2 legs, but most importantly, to be alive. Now, this is not to say that perspective allowed me to feel better about myself simply because those around me have it worse. Rather, it serves to highlight the unique circumstance and set of conditions for which I should be and am grateful. To focus on what I have, not on what I'm missing. To focus on what I can control, or at least influence, not on what I can't. There's an analogy that I think helps illustrate the way that I now view the events that surround my injury. And if you can do me a favor in your mind, picture a double-sided coin. On one side of the coin is the way I at first fell into looking at those events. It looked like this. How unlucky was I to step where I did in time and in space for that bomb to go off? Think of all the variables that had to line up throughout all of human history for this event to happen exactly the way that it did to me. How unlucky is that? Now, the other side of the coin that you're picturing in your mind, remembering it's the same coin, it's the same situation, but you're looking at the other side of the coin, which is what perspective is all about. Challenging yourself to look at a significant event in your life from a different angle. And for me, the other side of the coin looks like this. Given the fact that I did step where I did in time and in place, given the fact that I wasn't vaporized instantaneously, the fact that none of my teammates were injured in the blast, the fact that a helicopter could eventually get back on scene, given the fact that my teammates did everything in their control, putting their own lives on the line in the process to get me down off that hill over to the helicopter landing zone, loaded onto the helicopter within 1 minute of it reaching the bingo fuel mark. When I line up these facts, they lead me to conclude decisively that I'm actually incredibly lucky. This change in perspective for me all depended upon being able to see, challenging myself to see, truly see the other side of the coin, recognizing that you often cannot control or even influence what happens to you in life. But you absolutely can control how you choose to respond to what happens to you in life. There will be bombs, so to speak, hidden underground, waiting to go off in your life, despite all of the training, the preparation, the precautions you've taken. Sometimes these things just happen. You can't control it. But what you can control is how you choose to respond to all of this. In my experience, there is a very real and powerful sense of self-ownership, agency, in acknowledging that despite all of the uncertainty and risk in life, so much that often just seems to be out of your control, acknowledging that you do indeed control your reaction, your attitude, your mindset, your perspective. The second critical factor involved in creating momentum I learned about in training to become a Navy SEAL, and that is when things get really difficult, to sharpen and narrow your focus to what's right in front of you. which is to say that there is a method of shifting your mind away from some of these long-term thoughts and doubts of the future, which can often be discouraging during moments of extreme pressure, stress, pain, anxiety, grief, loss. And that's by prioritizing and rigorously focusing on the mechanics of what you actually need to do right now to improve your situation and get through this difficult moment. One step at a time, one more step. In the early days in the hospital, when the pain for me was very intense, my focus, often through necessity, was get through the next minute, make it through the next 5 minutes, make it to the next visitor. Do what it takes, whatever it takes, to get through today, make it to tomorrow, and then focus on tomorrow when you get there. Focus on what's right in front of you, right here, right now. When or if your mind wanders, notice this is happening, bring it back to the task at hand. Momentum in my life came from just these two things. By looking at the other side of the coin, by choosing which perspective to embrace, by narrowing the focus, focusing on the task at hand, on what you actually need to do right now to improve your situation and get through this difficult moment. This momentum carried me forward out of that hospital bed and into a wheelchair, eventually onto prosthetic legs, eventually walking, eventually running, and eventually onto the top of the podium at the Paralympic Winter Games. And so, thank you. And so, while mass and velocity create physical momentum, I've come to find that perspective and focus create life momentum, sometimes life-changing momentum, and perhaps even life-saving momentum. Thank you very much. Okay.